audio. I'm using computer audio. That's the good stuff right there. Yeah, right. All right. We're doing a screen share is what we're going to do. We are so very fancy in this day and age. Oh, my goodness. Yes. Job 28, the end of Job 28, verses 27 and 28 of Job 28 is where we're going to start. And we actually had ended here last time. Mike will recall. So we're joined in person by Sarah Reichley, Mike Frazier, by Greg and Luann Kamke, and grandchildren, their son Chad's children. So they also carry the Kamke last name, Avery Kamke, Reese Kamke. Good to go. I am, of course, Nathan Reichley, pastor here at St. Paul. That's for the videos for later is what's going on here, explaining to the live and in-persons. And now the people who join us online later, namely Mitch, they're like, yeah, I know. Yeah. Okay. So last time, I just had a really awkward finish to verses 27 and 28. And I don't know, so we're gonna go at these verses again. So the verses are, of course, then he, that is God, looked at wisdom and appraised it. He confirmed it and tested it. He said to the human race, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to shun evil is understanding. The Holy Spirit here is doing something wonderful in these two verses. Wisdom in verse 27 is briefly spoken of as a person. And we do well to see if wisdom is a person here in verse 27, that person is doing what a right-hand man does. So God is going to look at wisdom, like when he's looking to make a decision, where does he look? He looks to his right-hand man. And then the right-hand man makes a suggestion, and so God appraises it. Okay, thank you, right-hand man, for that. And then having appraised it and thought through the suggestion, the right-hand man has his suggestion confirmed. We're going to do that. All right. And then after it's been done or is being done, it gets tested. Okay, how did that go? Do we think that went a good way? These are the kinds of things that a right-hand man does. The reason that we notice this is because this is not the only place in the Bible where wisdom gets personified, where wisdom gets to be a person. And for that, we have got to hear how wisdom gets personified in Proverbs chapter 8. So I know you guys did all this work to get to Job chapter 28 just now, but now please, it's 2 books away. You got to go forward in the Bible, not backward in the Bible, forward in the Bible to past Psalm to Proverbs chapter 8. Will get you up Proverbs. So the order of the Bible, Job, Psalms, Proverbs. We are going to Proverbs chapter 8, and we are going to spend some time with especially verses 22 through 31. But once you guys are to Proverbs chapter 8 with me, you will notice in Proverbs chapter 8 that wisdom gets to be the speaker in Proverbs chapter 8, starting at verse 4, all the way through to the end of the chapter. So, chapter 8 of Proverbs says, there she is, wisdom, does she not call out? Does not understanding raise her voice? At the highest point along the way where the paths meet, she takes her stand beside the gate leading into the city at the entrance. She cries aloud, and then from verse 4 through the end of chapter 8, she is the one who is talking. Brief little moment here, a point made, is that in Hebrew, a noun is going to be either a feminine noun or a masculine noun. And wisdom happens to be a feminine noun. And so that's why you'll notice when it gets translated into English, it's a woman, because the noun wisdom is feminine. Sometime in Job, it was translated as it. He looked at it and appraised it and confirmed it and tested it. But the translators could just as easily have done her the whole way through. But English has a neuter pronoun, it. Hebrew doesn't. In Hebrew, it's either a she or a he. But we use a different language, so when it gets translated into English, we often lose the sense that it's a feminine noun. I bring this up to you because obviously wisdom, when it's personified, turns into a woman because it's a feminine noun. That's what's going on there. Eventually, we are going to make a rather somewhat startling, very important point about wisdom, and we are going to acknowledge that wisdom personified, here it is, the conclusion we're going to come to, is the Son of God, the second person of the Trinity. Wisdom person, the person talking in Proverbs chapter 8 is none other than the Son of God. In other words, you might say this is Jesus talking, except before he was incarnated of the Virgin Mary. And then you say, wait a minute, I thought you said wisdom was a woman. And that's where I go back to say, look, it was just how Hebrew language works. Wisdom is a feminine noun. So that's why it was a woman. But then when he became the flesh, he was made the son of Mary, the son of David. Okay, we have special attention here in Proverbs chapter 8. I want to pay to verses 22 through 31, in which we read, "The Lord brought me forth as the first of his works before his deeds of old. I was formed long ago." Yeah, sorry, this thing got funny on me. Ooh, that's nice. Okay, no. All right. I was formed long ages ago at the very beginning, when the world came to be, when there were no watery depths, I was given birth, when there were no springs of overflowing with water, before the mountains were settled in place, before the hills, I was given birth, before he made me, the world or its fields or any of the dust of the earth, I was there when he set the heavens in place, when he marked out the horizon on the face of the deep, when he established the clouds above and fixed securely the fountains of the deep, when he gave the sea its boundaries so waters would not overstep his command, and when he marked out the foundations of the earth, then I was constantly at his side. I was filled with delight day after day, rejoicing always in his presence, rejoicing in his whole world, and delighting in mankind. There we see wisdom involved in the work of creation. Remember the hint in Genesis chapter 1 at the creation of man, when he said, "Let us make man in our own image." Throughout all the bits of creation there in Genesis 1, God is saying, let there be light, let there be an expanse, let their waters all gather to one place and the dry land appear, let there. And then when he comes to day 6, and after he had said, let there be living things upon the earth, he said, okay, now let us make man. And then you come a millennia or more later to Proverbs 8, and you hear wisdom speaking about being there when creation was going on and being involved in and delighted with creation. There was that hint for us in Genesis 1 that Proverbs picks up. Also, it is significant that John chapter 1, so you go from the beginning of the Old Testament, now let's go to the beginning of the New Testament, and John chapter 1 tells us, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and nothing was made that was not made by the Word. Sorry, I'm going to do this with my paper Bible here, because I just realized I don't quite have John 1 super memorized. My wife had to memorize it in Latin. Could you give it to us in Latin just now? Yeah. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. So John 1 now spends some time saying the Word was with God in the beginning. Where do you think he gets this idea, if not from Proverbs 8, where the wisdom is pointing out having been there with God, participating in the work of creation. And so if Proverbs 8 is shedding more light for us, God is revealing himself more as his nature of being a number of persons. Further, what Paul says in Colossians chapter 1 will also fall in line with Proverbs chapter 8. Oh my goodness. If you'd like to try to chase me to Colossians 1, feel free. Colossians chapter 1, verses 15 through 20. You might even beat me there. I'm having a hard time getting there. I'm going slow. Colossians 1 in the NIV, 15 through 20, is where we are hearing it said about Jesus. I'll do the polite thing and wait for you to get there. That's Galatians. Colossians. That's Galatians there. Colossians is a few books late. Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, before 1 Thessalonians. In which, let me go ahead and do it this way. And I'll stick with doing it this way. Colossians 1. Verse 15. The Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body of the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead, so that in everything he might have the supremacy. For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven. It's kind of neat about him reconciling to himself things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. So what Paul writes there falls in line with Proverbs 8, where wisdom is speaking and has a role in creation and is revealed to us as having a being in very nature God. Peter also picks up on this in 2 Peter 3:5. I'll attempt to do that somewhat quickly since it is just one verse, in which Peter says, they deliberately, as he's complaining about scoffers who are scoffing, deliberately forget that long ago, by God's word, the heavens came into being and the earth was formed out of water and by water. Now, we of course know from Genesis 1, let there be, God spoke and it was. John points out for us that the word was with God in the beginning and the word was God, and in him was all, through him were all things made. And wisdom again, as the one who worked with God in making of all things. And so Peter falls in line with Proverbs chapter 8. And you say, okay, that's good. Paul, Peter, John the Apostle. What about Jesus himself? Well, listen to what he says in his revelation to John, where he says, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. I was with God at the beginning, and I delighted in its creation. Just as Proverbs 8 says. So all these New Testament passages account for and humble themselves to this bit in Proverbs, between Proverbs 8, verses 22 through 31, where wisdom is talking. So what I'm hoping you're seeing there is that the Bible, as we've just gone skip and do, here, there, and everywhere, mostly toward the end, but we started right at the beginning, holds together on this point that wisdom is a person of the Godhead, the second person of the triune God. And since we've gone through these passages in order to show the foundation of the church's teaching that God is three persons in one God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, but one God, confessed as one God. This would point out for us of why there are so much extra biblical ink spilled to explain the God of the Bible is triune, as they are pulling together all of these different witnesses from the Bible so that we can try to, in our human language, explain what God has shown us in his divine language here in the Bible. Especially, again, on this point, that the second person of the Trinity, which was there from the beginning, was there at the beginning, was incarnated at a certain time, even though that second person of the Trinity is an eternal God who doesn't have a beginning or doesn't have an end. Was there at the beginning, of course, but that's because God was there at the beginning, because God is three persons in one God. Wisdom's speech here, along with, when we understand wisdom's speech to be when we understand the concept of the Trinity, and when we understand that the second person of the Trinity was there at the beginning, and then that person of the Trinity was incarnated, but was always eternally present, well, then what Proverbs 8 says clicks into place as being, this is God revealing something about himself, his multi-person nature. And then going back to Job, this brief little thing where wisdom gets personified again goes right along with that longer thing from Proverbs 8 where wisdom was doing the talking, and our understanding of who God is revealing himself to be and how Job holds on to God, the God of the whole Bible. Well, we start to see it quite amazingly. And then we recall Job is the one who says, I know that my Redeemer lives and I will see him standing on the earth at the last, and in my flesh I will see God. And that really doesn't make any sense until you have Jesus come back from the dead. And you're just like, whoa, 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 whoa. Job is being given this glimpses of wisdom about God so that he may hold on to God in the midst of his suffering. And which is what he says, that, we can't really understand God, but so what God makes known about himself, that's what we have to hold on to. So Job becomes one more of the voices that the Holy Spirit has inspired so that we who have heard them are carried along to glorify God for sending Jesus, who is the very wisdom of God, so that we might see that wisdom of God and might know the glory of God and can grasp who Jesus is and who he is, God who has come to save us. I'm reminded again of John's point at the end of his gospel. These things are written so you may believe Jesus is the Christ, and by believing, have life in his name. So then verse 28, after God has looked at, the God the Father, the first person of the Trinity, looks at the second person of the Trinity in verse 27. Now he reveals to the human race, and this is what Job is hearing for himself, the fear of the Lord, as the Lord has revealed himself to us, and to humble ourselves before him. This is wisdom. This is true religion. This is faith. And then, of course, as we have this fear of the Lord, we shun evil. This is the holy life of what true religion and faith do. And that's the unity of Jesus' faith. He shows us himself that we might rightly know him and fear him, and we might know ourselves forgiven by him as he brings his gifts down upon us. And then we shun evil for the sake of the people around us, because he has given us his grace and his forgiveness. And we have this wonderful unity of faith in Jesus. which sets us right before God so that we might shun evil for the sake of others. So Job is here concluding for himself and for the others, because he's saying, look, this is what God has revealed for us. He says to us, stop trying to penetrate the mysteries that God has reserved for himself. Just instead, be fearful of and faithful to the mysteries that he has shown us, that he has committed for us to know. And then get on with the life get on with living with this wisdom that God has given us. Let us continue charging on. Right, no, yeah, there you go. Now on to chapter 29. And in chapter 1, Job was depicted to us as a man who is upright and blameless, who fears God and shuns evil. Quite certain, yep. He was blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil. And chapter 1 also gave us a description of Job's wealth and his greatness. Okay? And it just briefly said, he was the greatest of the people of the East. He had all this livestock and he had all these sons and daughters, and everybody loved him. All right. This chapter 29, is the poetic version of all that. Now, as you hear it, please do not think Job is arrogant, okay? Because he's going to sound pretty arrogant. But recall, based on what we know of Job, we've got pretty good reason to believe he's not speaking false words. Now, they paint the best and the brightest picture of Job available. They paint everything in the kindest possible way. But that really does not surprise us, and you will see, rhetorically here, Job is setting us up, because he's calling to mind all of the good things, because a move is about to be made in the next chapter, in chapter 30, that is going to build off of what he is saying here in chapter 29. How I long for the months gone by, for the days when God watched over me, when his lamp shone on my head, and by his light I walked through darkness. Oh, for the days when I was in my prime, when God's intimate friendship blessed my house, when the Almighty was still with me and my children were around me, when my path was drenched with cream and the rock poured out for me streams of olive oil. When I went to the gate of the city and I took my seat in the public square, and the young men saw me and stepped aside, and the old men rose to their feet, and the chief men refrained from speaking and covered their mouths with their hands. The voices of the nobles were hushed, and their tongues stuck to the roofs of their mouths. And whoever heard me spoke well of me, and those who saw me commended me, because I rescued the poor who cried for help, and the fatherless who had none to assist them. The one who was dying blessed me. I made the widow's heart sing. I put on righteousness as my clothing. Justice was my robe and my turban. I was eyes to the blind, feet to the lame. I was a father to the needy. I took up the care of the stranger. I broke the fangs of the wicked and snatched the victims from their teeth. I thought, I will die in my house. My days as numerous as the grains of sand, and my roots will reach down to the water, and the dew will lie all night on my branches. My glory will not fade. The bow will ever be new in my hand. And people listened to me expectantly, waiting in silence for my counsel. And after I'd spoken, they spoke no more. My words fell gently on their ears. They waited for me as for showers, and they drank in my words as spring rain. And when I smiled at them, they scarcely believed it. The light of my face was precious to them. I chose the way for them. I sat as their chief. I dwelt as a king among his troops. I was like one who comforted mourners. Back in verse 6, or verse 3, we hear an echo of Psalm 119, 105. Lord, your word is a lamp for my feet and a light for my path. But so that word was shining for him. He saw that lamp. His path was illuminated. Love the poetic verse 6. My path was drenched with cream, and the rock poured out for me streams of olive oil, which, to us just sounds like an unholy mess. But the point there obviously being he had just abundance of the land, easily done with all the dairy and the orchards that he had. Everywhere he went and everything he touched, it was good for him and it was good for everyone. Verse 8, when the young men are stepping aside and the old men are rising to their feet, we're just seeing shows of respect. The young and the old, everybody thought well of him. In every crowd he went, people thought it was good that he was there. In verse 10, the voices of the nobles were hushed and their tongues stuck to the roof of their mouth. You see this dynamic quite routinely in your television dramas, in your movies. I'm watching a television miniseries about Chernobyl, and the people who had responsibility over the plant were all gathered together in a meeting, and it's clamorous because, what are they supposed to do? How are they supposed to get this fixed? What are they supposed to tell people? So on and so forth. And then one of the old guys who was in the room just kind of bangs his cane on the floor. And everybody, and they wait for the old guy to talk. And he told them absolutely crap advice. It was terrible. It did not work at all. But the old guy talked. Everybody was like, ooh, he's given us the wisdom. And he got done talking and they all stood up and clapped and everything. It was just classic. That's the scene Job is describing here. Verse 14, he puts on his righteousness as clothing, justice like a turban. His actions and their rightness, they were obvious to everyone who saw him. You just knew looking at him, he was going to do right, like it was on his clothes, like the way we judge people by their clothes. But I also hear an echo of Galatians 3:26, where Paul says, you who are baptized in Christ have put on Christ. So he's covered up in righteousness. And then verse 20, this one was a bit strange to me, but happily I read into chapter 30, and so it got figured out. But the bow all of a sudden he's got a bow. My glory will not fade. My bow will ever be new in my hand. And I'm thinking, violin? I'm thinking, what is going on here with this bow he's got? It is an archery bow. It is an archery bow. And it is showing his danger and deadliness against his enemies. You do not mess with this guy. His bow is in his hand. We're talking about Robin Hood here, right? You got Robin Hood with a bow. Okay, you do not mess with Robin Hood when he has a bow. And so that would be encouragement to his friends and fearful for his enemies. But now, here's that rhetorical move that he makes in verse 30. See, it's the opposite of chapter 29. So I'm sorry, I said verse 30. I, of course, meant to say chapter 30. It's the opposite of what happened in chapter 29. Now, they mock me. Men younger than me, whose fathers I would have disdained to even put with my sheepdogs. Of what use was the strength of their hands to me, since their vigor had gone from them? Haggard from want and hunger, they roamed the parched land. In desolate wastelands at night, in the brush they gathered salt herbs. Their food was the root of the broom bush. They were banished from human society, shouted at as if they were thieves. They were forced to live in dry stream beds, among the rocks, in holes in the ground, and they brayed among the bushes and huddled in the undergrowth. A base and nameless brood, they were driven out of the land. And now those young men mocked me in song. I've become a byword to them. They detest me. They keep their distance, yet they don't hesitate to spit in my face. And now that God has unstrung my bow and afflicted me, they throw off restraint in my presence. On my right, the tribe attacks, and they lay snares for my feet, and they build siege ramps against me, and they break up my road, and they succeed in destroying me. No one can help them, they say, and they advance as though through a gaping breach amid the ruins they come rolling in, and terrors overwhelm me, and my dignity is driven away as by the wind. My safety vanishes like a cloud, and now my life ebbs away. Days of suffering grip me. Night pierces my bones. My gnawing pains never rest. In his great power, God becomes like clothing to me. He binds me like the neck of my garment, And he throws me into the mud, and I'm reduced to dust and ashes. And I cry out to you, God, but you do not answer. I stand up, but you merely look at me. You turn on me ruthlessly. With the might of your hand, you attack me, and you snatch me up, and you drive me before the wind, and you toss me about in the storm. And I know you will bring me down to death, to the place appointed for all the living. And surely no one lays a hand on a broken man when he cries for help in his distress. And have I not wept for those in trouble? Has not my soul grieved for the poor? Yet when I hoped for good, evil came. When I looked for light, then came darkness. The churning inside me never stops. Days of suffering confront me. I go about blackened, but not by the sun. I stand up in the assembly and I cry for help. And I've become a brother of jackals, a companion of owls. My skin grows black and peels. My body burns with fever. My lyre is tuned to mourning. My pipe to the sound of wailing. Just the opposite of chapter 29. Verses 1 through 8, that whole big long description about, it's just strange. But it's all, especially verses 2 through 8 are explaining the fathers who I would have disdained to put with my sheepdogs. And so he's really just going at length to describe despised and lowly people. People who wait out in the wilderness, people who just, they're debased, a group. And yet this group ends up despising Job. And they end up being higher on the social ladder than him. These people who he gets called people who bray among the bushes. So there you kind of got this sense of they're a bunch of donkeys. We have other words for donkeys. And yet they're the people who are despising and being higher on the social ladder than Job is. Verse 11, this is where the bow thing comes back in. God has unstrung my bow. He is now Robin Hood with no bow. What good is he then? Verse 18, in his great power, God becomes like clothing to me. He binds me like the neck of my garment. The Hebrew is uncommon here. This isn't usual stuff. Like you can't pull these words out and say, okay, well, this is how they were used when they were telling the story of David or when Isaiah used them in the prophecy or so on. You hunt around in your Old Testament Hebrew, you're not really going to find these words anywhere. So people have oftentimes said, we think it's kind of like this, but that's why if you're reading it anywhere like I'm reading it, I'm like, hold on. Night pierces my bones, my gnawing pains never rest, okay? In his great power, God becomes like clothing to me. Okay, he throws me into the mud. I'm reduced to dust and ashes. Okay, the surrounding verses make like all the sense. No problem. God is against me. It's going badly. What's going on? Okay, it has to fit somewhere in like that where this is bad. And so we constrain ourselves. However we understand in his great power, God becomes like clothing to me and he binds me like the neck of my garment. We are constrained to understand this is not good. Whatever that might mean, it's not good. Bad stuff happening to Job. Verses 24 through 26. See, Job had been helping people who needed help. That was a huge point from chapter 29. But now, 24 to 26, he's saying, I'm getting no help. Where are the people who should be helping me? I'm the one who now needs the help. I helped them when they needed it. Where's my help now? And then verse 29, jackals, owls. I think in northeast Wisconsin here, we would say coyotes and vultures, turkey vultures, right? Just kind of animals you're like, I'm not really happy they're around. Jackals and owls were nocturnal animals, despicable animals, and animals who loved to make their homes in ruins. So if they didn't have to, make a natural, they loved an old broken down house. So already you kind of got a negative impact of like, where are you going to find them? Well, where that fire took out, or where that, owls, jackals, they're typically found where bad stuff has happened. All right. I'm down to 1 minute and I just got way too much time. or not enough time, because I didn't start till late, and we had a nice long service, this long first service. But in chapter 31, where we will pick it up next time, Job is going to bring home his point. We've heard his point before. He's just going to bring it home. So his point is going to be, I didn't do anything that deserves all this suffering. He's been saying that the whole time. He's going to acknowledge, if I did do something that deserves all this suffering, and you could successfully point it out, then I would gladly confess it. Yes, I'd be down for that. No problem. But try as I might to confess having done something wrong, I can't find it. I've been looking. I have been searching this mind, this soul, this heart. I haven't been able to find it. I don't know what's going on. That's where the words of Job are going to end. But it's really a very poetic chapter, chapter 31. So that's where we will pick it up. Love you all. Bye-bye.